child models, when did you realize your childhood wasn't normal? When I was 7, sitting in an ice bath for 30 minutes to make my skin paler, my mom not letting me out despite my lips turning blue. Stop shivering or we'll start over, she said, scrolling through tomorrow's call sheet. The client specifically requested porcelain skin. The doorbell rang. 30 more seconds, my mother said, not looking up. The doorbell rang again, harder. Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you about your daughter. My mother's phone slipped from her hand, splashing into the ice water. Water dripped from my body as she wrapped me in a towel that was too small, meant for my face only. Before you think of tattletaling, remember what we did to your baby teeth, my father hissed as he pushed me toward the door. The CPS worker was a woman named Favor. A photographer sent us concerning photos from yesterday's shoot, bruising patterns and significant hair loss. My mother positioned herself behind Favor where only I could see her face twist into that look that meant the garage floor tonight. I forced my mouth into the pose from my comp card. Sweet, innocent, marketable. Everything's wonderful. I love modeling more than anything. Favor pulled out her tablet, zooming in on a behind-the-scenes photo. Why are there hand-shaped bruises on your arms covered with body makeup? I bruise easily. It's genetic. My mom helps cover them so clients don't worry. She swiped to another image. And the bald patches? My hand instinctively went to the clips holding my extensions. Just trying a new look. Very editorial. You're 10 years old. Why aren't you in school? My mother cut in. We homeschool between bookings. She earns more than you make in a year. Would you waste time on multiplication tables if you were banking 6 figures? Favor asked to see my schoolwork. My father laughed. We don't waste money on books when she could be practicing her poses. His hand moved to his belt, the way it did when he was about to prove who owned who. Favor's expression hardened. I need to speak with your daughter alone. Absolutely not, my father said. We don't leave her with strangers. Favor held up her badge. Refusing will require me to involve law enforcement. My mother's nails dug into my shoulder through the towel. We'll be right outside, sweetheart, she cooed in her client voice. But her whisper was different. Remember, we made you. We can unmake you. They left the door cracked. I could see my father's shadow. Can you read this consent form? Favor handed me a paper. After 30 seconds of silence, I whispered, I love reading, because that's what normal kids said. Can you write your name? My hand shook holding the pen. I knew it started with an E. Or was it an A? The letters swam like they always did. Everything's perfect here, I said louder, knowing they were listening. Favor leaned close. I'm going to ask your parents for complete privacy now. My father burst in. You can't, I can, and I will. Or we can wait for the police. Your choice. They left. Favor shut the door completely. The click of the lock sounded like freedom. But I could hear them pacing, like caged animals deciding whether to eat their young. Show me where you sleep. I led her to my room, the one with the white furniture and ring light setup. This is lovely. Where do you actually sleep? The lie was right there, but I was so tired. My head hurt from the ice bath. My feet hurt from yesterday's heels. Everything hurt. The garage, I whispered and started crying. She followed me out there. 2 yoga mats on concrete. A space heater that didn't work. My portfolio propped against the wall. My smiling face mocking me from 100 different angles. Favor took pictures of everything. I knew I'd pay for this later. If there was a later. A doctor arrived within an hour. My parents paced outside, making calls to my agency, threatening to sue everyone. The exam revealed everything. Stress fractures in both feet from standing in heels since I was 6. Malnutrition despite the healthy lifestyle my parents promoted to casting directors. Patches of scalp where hair would never grow back. Too much bleaching. Too many extensions ripped out in frustration when I couldn't hold a pose. When did you last eat a full meal? The doctor asked. I've been on ice cubes for 3 days. Beach shoot coming up. My stomach had stopped hurting yesterday. That's how I knew it was working. Favor looked through my portfolio, comparing recent photos to my early work. You've lost significant weight. I nodded. Size 00 books more than size 2. Do you have friends? Play dates? Normal kid activities? I had friends at the agency once, before I started booking too much. My parents said jealousy is bad for business. My voice kept getting smaller. Each truth felt like pulling out another tooth. Favor went to confront my parents while the doctor stayed with me. Through the door, I could hear everything. The explosion I'd been waiting for my whole life. She can't read because you don't send her to school. She's covered in injuries. My father exploded. His voice got louder and I heard something crash against the wall. Favor moved in front of me like a shield while pulling out her phone. The security guard she'd brought stepped between us and the door where my father was trying to push his way back inside. My whole body shook so hard the towel fell off my shoulders, and I couldn't make my hands work right to pull it back up. The doctor arrived 10 minutes later with a medical bag and kind eyes that made me want to cry more. She knelt down to my level and asked permission before touching me, which nobody ever did at photo shoots. Favor kept taking pictures of the garage, the yoga mats, my portfolio with its 100 smiling versions of me that looked nothing like the scared kid standing there in wet underwear. Outside, my parents screamed about lawsuits and defamation and how much money I made them, not realizing that admitting the money part just proved everything Favor was documenting. The doctor wrapped me in a real blanket from her bag and checked my temperature and pulse while asking questions in a soft voice. My teeth chattered so hard I could barely answer. The security guard's radio crackled with something about police backup, and my mother's voice went from angry to scared in half a second. The ambulance felt like a spaceship taking me to another planet where I didn't know the rules. I'd never been in one before, even though there were at least 6 times my feet hurt so bad I couldn't walk right for a week. The paramedic tucked heated blankets around me that felt like hugging the sun after years in a freezer. He kept asking if anything hurt, and I didn't know how to answer because everything hurt all the time. That was just normal. So did he mean hurt different from usual? Or hurt more than yesterday? Or hurt in a new way? I settled on saying my feet hurt and my head hurt and my stomach hurt, which was true but also left out about 20 other things. Through the ambulance windows, I could see my parents in the driveway surrounded by police now, my mother crying into her hands while my father pointed and yelled. The paramedic adjusted something on a machine that beeped next to me and said my heart rate was too fast. I wanted to tell him that was also normal, that my heart always raced like it was trying to escape my chest, but I was too tired to explain. They took me to a private exam area in the emergency room, where a female doctor with short gray hair and gentle hands examined my feet first. She pressed carefully on different spots, and my whole body jerked when she touched the outside of my left foot. The x-rays showed stress fractures in both feet from standing in heels since I was 6 years old, tiny cracks in bones that were supposed to be growing, not breaking. She photographed the hand-shaped bruises on my arms where my father grabbed me to position me correctly, the ones I'd gotten so good at covering with body makeup that most photographers never noticed. Her camera clicked and flashed while documenting the bald patches on my scalp, where extensions had ripped out hair follicles that would never grow back. When she measured my weight, the scale said 37 pounds, and she wrote something on her chart with a frown. I should weigh 60 pounds for my age and height. The doctor took photos of my spine where you could count every bone through my skin and my ribs that stuck out like xylophone keys. She asked about my last meal, and I told her about the ice cubes and the beet shoot, and she looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. Favor sat next to me during the whole exam holding my hand and promising I wouldn't have to go back to my parents' house tonight. I didn't believe her because adults always said things they didn't mean, especially when they wanted you to cooperate or calm down or stop crying. But she kept saying it every time I started shaking again, repeating the same words like she was trying to make them true through repetition. The doctor asked about school, and I gave my rehearsed answer about homeschooling between bookings. Favor squeezed my hand and said I could tell the truth now. The truth felt dangerous in my mouth like swallowing broken glass, but I was so tired of lying. I admitted I couldn't read and didn't know multiplication, and had never been to a real school because my parents said it would interfere with my availability. The doctor and Favor exchanged a look that made my stomach hurt worse than the hunger. My parents arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later with a lawyer in an expensive suit who started threatening everyone in the waiting room about ruining my career. I could hear my mother's voice through the walls getting higher and sharper the way it did right before she got really mean, the tone that meant consequences later. The security guard made them stay in a different area, away from the exam rooms. Their lawyer kept saying words like defamation and false allegations and loss of income, while my mother performed her concerned parent act for anyone watching. I knew that performance better than my own face because I'd watched her use it with casting directors and clients and teachers from the fake homeschool program we pretended I attended. My father's voice joined in, lower and angrier, making threats about what would happen when they got me back. The security guard's radio crackled again, and more people arrived to keep my parents contained in their separate waiting area. A different CPS worker came to interview me while Favor went to handle my parents. This one had tired eyes and a clipboard full of forms. I automatically started reciting my agency-approved lines about loving my work and being grateful for opportunities and how modeling was my passion. The words came out smooth and practiced like a commercial script I'd memorized years ago. She listened without interrupting and then asked about where I slept. I started to describe my room with the white furniture and ring lights, but she stopped me and asked again, specifically about the garage. I accidentally said it gets cold at night before I could stop myself. Her whole face changed from neutral to something that looked like anger mixed with sadness. She wrote fast on her clipboard and asked more questions about the concrete floor and the space heater that didn't work, and how long I'd been sleeping out there. Each answer felt like betraying my parents, but also like finally telling someone the truth that had been rotting inside me for years. They admitted me overnight for observation, because the doctor worried about something called refeeding syndrome since I'd been starving for so long. She explained that my body had forgotten how to process regular food, and eating too much too fast could make me really sick, or even kill me. A nurse brought me juice and crackers on a tray, and I stared at them trying to remember the last time someone just gave me food without making me earn it first. My stomach cramped when I tried to drink the juice, sharp pains that made me curl up on the hospital bed. The crackers turned to paste in my mouth that I couldn't swallow right because my throat had forgotten how to handle solid food. The nurse said to go slow and take tiny sips and not force anything. I managed half the juice box before my stomach revolted and I thought I might throw up. My body had spent so long in survival mode that it didn't trust food anymore, treating it like poison instead of help. In the morning, a man named Franz Barrett came to my hospital room and introduced himself as my new caseworker. He had dark skin and kind eyes and a way of talking that didn't make me feel stupid. He pulled out a calendar with big, colorful squares and explained what happens next using simple words and pictures. There would be court dates and interviews and medical appointments all marked on the calendar with different colored stickers. He showed me photos on his tablet of different places I might stay, Houses with regular bedrooms and families who took care of kids who couldn't live with their parents right now. None of them had ring lights or call sheets or mirrors covering entire walls. That made me feel weird and relieved at the same time. Like part of me was scared to not have those things, but another part was so tired of performing every second. Franz said I got to have opinions now about what I wanted and where I felt safe. Nobody had ever asked me what I wanted before. By afternoon, they'd found an emergency foster home with a woman named Aria Henderson, who smiled too much and talked in a gentle voice that made me suspicious. She took me to a house in a neighborhood with trees, and showed me a guest room with regular kid stuff instead of photography equipment. There were books on shelves and stuffed animals on the bed and curtains with stars on them. Aria pointed out where the bathroom was, and where she kept snacks in the kitchen and said I could eat whenever I was hungry without asking permission first. That felt like a trap, because in my real life, food was earned through perfect poses and good behavior and booking high-paying jobs. I was too tired to figure out what she really wanted from me, so I just nodded and tried to look grateful the way clients liked. She seemed nice, but everyone seemed nice at first until they showed you who they really were. That first night in Aria's house, I couldn't sleep because the walls were the wrong color, and there was no ring light telling me where to position myself. The bed was too soft, and the blankets were too heavy, and the quiet felt louder than screaming. I kept waiting for someone to come in and tell me tomorrow's schedule or yell about my posture or drag me out to the garage for punishment. Every small sound made me freeze and hold my breath, listening for footsteps that would mean I'd done something wrong. But nobody came and the quiet stretched on forever. Just the sound of a clock ticking somewhere and a dog barking far away. I stared at the ceiling, counting the shadows and trying to remember how to breathe normally. My body didn't know how to rest without fear, didn't understand that maybe tonight nobody would hurt me. The uncertainty felt worse than the familiar pain, because at least with pain, I knew what to expect and how to survive it. His voice got loud and mean, yelling about how they provided everything for me and I was ungrateful, and this was all a big misunderstanding. My mother joined in with her crying voice, the one she used when she wanted people to feel sorry for her. I sat on the exam table picking at the paper covering while the doctor stood near the door like a guard. Favor came back after 20 minutes with 2 police officers and told my parents they needed to leave the property immediately. Through the doorway, I watched my father's face turn red and his hands curl into fists, but the officers didn't move or look scared. My mother grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the parking lot, and the last thing I heard was her saying something about lawyers and custody and how they'd get me back tomorrow. The doctor closed the door and asked if I needed anything, but I just shook my head because my throat felt too tight to talk. Favor sat down next to me and explained that I wouldn't be going home tonight or maybe for a long time, and they'd found a safe place for me to stay. The ambulance took me to the hospital even though I kept saying I was fine, but nobody listened when I said I didn't need all this attention. They admitted me overnight in a pediatric room with cartoon characters on the walls and a TV I didn't know how to work. A nurse brought me juice and crackers on a plastic tray, and when I tried to eat the crackers, my stomach cramped so bad I thought I was dying. She explained something about my body forgetting how to process real food after living on ice cubes, and I felt stupid for breaking my own stomach. Franz showed up the next morning with a backpack full of clothes that weren't mine, and a folder with papers and pictures. He pulled out the calendar covered in colorful stickers and showed me all the appointments coming up, using his finger to point at each square. Court dates and doctor visits and meetings with people I'd never met, all marked with different colored dots. He showed me photos on his tablet of houses where kids stayed when they couldn't live with their parents, regular houses with bedrooms that had actual beds instead of yoga mats. None of them had ring lights or mirrors covering the walls or racks of outfits organized by season and client preference. Looking at those normal rooms made my chest feel weird, like I was scared and relieved at the same time. By afternoon, they released me from the hospital and Franz drove me to a neighborhood with trees and houses that all looked similar. Aria met us at the door with a smile that seemed too big, and a voice that sounded like she was talking to a baby. She showed me the guest room with a regular bed and stuffed animals and books on shelves, and I didn't know what to do with any of it. The bathroom had a mirror, but it wasn't the good kind with special lighting, just a regular mirror that showed how small and weird I looked without my extensions and makeup. That night I couldn't sleep because the bed was too soft and the quiet felt wrong. I kept waiting for footsteps or yelling or someone coming to drag me out for punishment, but nothing happened. Just silence and darkness and my brain not knowing how to rest without fear. The next morning, Aria made eggs and toast and put a plate in front of me without asking what I was allowed to eat. I stared at the food trying to calculate calories and remember what my mother's rules were about breakfast before shoots. Aria sat down across from me and started eating her own food like this was normal, like she wasn't watching to make sure I performed gratitude correctly. I picked up my fork and cut 1 bite of eggs into 4 tiny pieces, then put 1 piece in my mouth and chewed exactly 20 times before swallowing. My stomach hurt immediately, but I took another microbite and repeated the counting. After 3 bites, I put my fork down and pushed the plate away slightly, and Aria just nodded and asked if I wanted to save the rest for later. She didn't comment on my weird rules or try to force more food or take photos of the plate to prove I ate. The phone rang that afternoon while I was sitting on the couch trying to figure out how the TV remote worked. Aria answered, and I heard my mother's voice through the speaker doing her sweet mom act, the one she used for casting directors and clients. She was asking about me in that concerned tone that sounded caring but wasn't, saying she just wanted to make sure her baby was okay. Franz appeared from somewhere and took the phone from Aria, and his voice got firm as he explained something about supervised contact only, and court orders. My mother's voice shifted instantly to the scary one, the one that meant someone was about to pay, and she started yelling about her rights and lawyers before Franz ended the call. He looked at me sitting frozen on the couch and said my parents weren't allowed to call here anymore, and I nodded but couldn't make words come out. A woman named Nicole Harrington came to visit the next day carrying a briefcase and wearing a suit that looked expensive. She sat down in Arya's living room and explained that she was my lawyer. Not my parents' lawyer or CPS's lawyer. Just mine. I didn't understand how that worked because I was 10 and didn't have money for lawyers. But she kept talking about rights and choices and how she'd tell the judge what I wanted. She used phrases like, "your decision" and "what do you think?" that sounded fake because adults never actually cared what I thought about anything. But she kept saying it, kept asking my opinion about stuff, and I didn't know how to respond. Franz's phone kept buzzing with messages from the modeling agency about my commitments and contracts and clients who were expecting me. He showed me some of the messages that used words like breach and obligations, and made it sound like I was the one breaking rules by getting taken away from my parents. The agency manager left a voicemail saying they needed to discuss my future and responsibilities, and Franz played it on speaker so I could hear how they were trying to manipulate me. Then he blocked their number and explained that agencies don't own people no matter what my parents told me. But I still felt guilty about the clients I was disappointing, and the shoots I was missing. On day 3, Franz came back with papers that had a judge's signature, and he explained using simple words that my parents couldn't take me anywhere without a supervisor watching. He called it an ex parte order and showed me where the judge had checked boxes and written notes. I felt my shoulders relax slightly, knowing there was an official rule keeping them away. But I also felt terrified because I knew my parents would find some way to punish me for this, even though I didn't ask for any of it. That night, I found my comp card in the bag of stuff they'd brought from my house, the glossy photos showing me in different poses and outfits with my stats printed on the back. I stared at the girl in those pictures who looked happy and successful and professional, and I didn't recognize her. I hid the card under the mattress because I didn't want Arya to see it, but I couldn't throw it away either. Looking in Arya's bathroom mirror, I saw a scared kid with messy hair and no makeup, nothing like the polished model in the comp card photos. Franz explained they'd filed something called a dependency petition that listed all the ways my parents hurt me, and there would be a court hearing in 2 weeks to decide what happens next. He pulled out the calendar again and marked the important dates with stickers, which felt babyish but actually helped me understand the timeline. A woman named Sage Meadows interviewed me at the Child Advocacy Center in a room with toys and dolls and a camera mounted in the corner. She had dark skin and a gentle voice, and she asked me to show her using the dolls what happened at home. I told her about the ice baths and sleeping in the garage and not going to the school, and she recorded everything on the camera that she said only the judge would see. Talking about it out loud to a stranger made it feel more real and more shameful at the same time. They sent me for more medical tests at a different hospital where doctors took x-rays of my feet and found stress fractures plus evidence of old breaks that had healed wrong. One doctor examined my scalp and took close-up photos of the bald patches where hair wouldn't grow back, and another doctor measured my bones and said I was smaller than I should be for my age. Franz told me later that all these reports would help prove my parents hurt me, and I felt validated that people believed me, but also ashamed that strangers were documenting all my damage. The school district sent someone to Arya's house to evaluate me for enrollment, and she brought forms and papers covered in words I couldn't read. I stared at the intake form for 10 minutes trying to make the letters make sense, but they just swam around like they always did. After watching me struggle, the evaluator realized I was completely illiterate and started making notes about special education assessment and testing. I wanted to disappear into the floor or run away or anything except sit there while she wrote down how stupid I was. She asked me basic questions about letters and sounds, and I couldn't answer any of them, and her face got sadder with each wrong answer or silence. By the time she left, I felt like the dumbest person alive, and Arya tried to tell me it wasn't my fault, but I knew I should have learned to read somehow, even without school. Franz drove me to my first appointment with Celeste Cook 3 days later, in an office building that smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. The waiting room had magazines I couldn't read, and a fish tank where one orange fish kept swimming in circles by itself. Celeste opened her door and smiled without showing too many teeth, gesturing me inside to a room with 2 chairs and a bookshelf and gray walls that didn't hurt to look at. I sat in the chair farthest from the door and started counting the white tiles on the floor because that was something I could control. 1, 2, 3, 4. She sat down across from me and didn't say anything. 5, 6, 7, 8. I kept waiting for her to pull out dolls or art supplies or make me talk about feelings, but she just sat there with her hands folded in her lap. 9, 10, 11, 12. After maybe 10 minutes, she said her office was a safe place where I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to do. I counted to 36 before the session ended, and she told me she'd see me next week. The whole drive back to Arya's house, I felt confused because therapy was supposed to be harder than that. Franz scheduled a supervised phone call with my mother the next afternoon at the CPS office with a speakerphone in the middle of a table. He sat next to me with a notepad, and my mother's voice came through sounding small and far away. She started crying immediately, telling me how much she missed me and how empty the house felt without me. Then her voice changed, and she reminded me about all the sacrifices she made, driving me to castings at 5 in the morning, paying for my comp cards, turning down her own career opportunities so I could shine. She said if I just came home and apologized to everyone, we could fix this whole misunderstanding and get back to work. My body wanted to believe her so badly that my hands started shaking. Franz wrote something on his notepad and pushed it toward me. It said, "You don't have to respond." But my brain knew she was lying even while my stomach twisted with guilt. She kept talking about the beach campaign we were supposed to shoot next month, and how the client specifically requested me. I stared at Franz's handwriting until the call ended. That evening, Arya was scrolling on her computer when she made a weird noise and closed the browser window fast. But I'd already seen my face on the screen, one of those gossip sites with pink headers and too many ads. She tried to distract me with dinner, but I asked to see it, and she reluctantly pulled it back up. Someone had leaked behind-the-scenes photos from my last shoot, the one where I wore the white dress and had to stand in cold water for 2 hours. The agency had put out a statement about unforeseen personal circumstances requiring our young talent to step back from current obligations. The comment section was full of strangers analyzing my body, debating whether I looked too thin or if it was just camera angles and lighting. One person said I looked healthy and people were overreacting. Another said you could see my ribs through the dress and someone should have intervened sooner. I felt exposed in a completely different way than posing for cameras, like these people could see inside me and were picking apart what they found. Arya closed the laptop and suggested we watch a movie instead, but I couldn't stop thinking about all those eyes examining my photos and deciding things about me. Franz came by a few days later with his tablet and a serious expression. Police had executed a search warrant at my parents' house that morning and documented everything in the garage with photos and measurements. He thought it would help me understand this wasn't normal, seeing it through official eyes. The first photo showed both yoga mats on the concrete with the broken space heater in the corner. The second showed my portfolio propped against the wall, all those smiling versions of me watching over where I slept. The third was a wide shot with a ruler for scale, showing how small the space actually was. Looking at that concrete floor through the camera made me feel cold again even though I was sitting in Arya's warm living room. Franz pointed out details in the photos like he was narrating evidence, but I just kept staring at that blue yoga mat and remembering how the cold would seep up through it into my spine. He put the tablet away when he noticed I'd stopped listening. Arya set up a meeting with a nutritionist who created a meal plan that wouldn't shock my system after years of starvation. The nutritionist explained about refeeding and how my body had forgotten how to process regular food, but knowing the science didn't help when every bite of solid food brought cramps that doubled me over. Some days I could only manage protein shakes and broth, sipping slowly while my stomach cramped and twisted. Other days I'd eat half a piece of toast and spend an hour in the bathroom feeling like my insides were trying to turn themselves inside out. Arya never pushed or made me feel bad about it, just kept offering small portions and celebrating when I managed to finish anything. I hated that my stomach had forgotten how to be hungry properly after all those years of ice cubes and laxatives. The nutritionist said it would take months for my digestive system to heal. Months felt like forever when every meal was a battle. My first day at public school felt like walking onto a set where everyone else knew their blocking, but nobody had given me a script. The teacher was nice enough, introducing me to the class and assigning me a desk near the window. Everything seemed okay until she asked us to share our favorite books, and I automatically said, "I love reading," because that's what normal kids said. But then she smiled and asked me to read aloud from the chapter book on my desk. I stared at the page for 30 seconds while the letters swam and rearranged themselves. The other kids started whispering. The teacher's smile got smaller. Finally, I whispered that I couldn't read, and the classroom went completely silent. She recovered quickly and called on someone else, but I felt every eye on me for the rest of the day. At lunch, I sat alone at the end of a table and nobody talked to me. Lyle Edwards pulled me out of class the next week for testing in a small office with puzzles and flashcards and questions that felt designed to prove how stupid I was. But after 2 hours of assessment, he told me I had severe dyslexia that nobody had ever identified because I'd never been in the school. He explained how my brain processed letters differently, and it wasn't about intelligence at all. He created something called an IEP with specialized instruction and accommodations, using words like multisensory approach and Orton-Gillingham method. Then he said I was actually smart, just needed different teaching strategies. I started crying right there in his office because I'd spent my whole life thinking I was too stupid to learn. He handed me tissues and said we'd start working together 3 times a week. For the first time, I felt like maybe reading wasn't impossible, just something I hadn't been taught the right way. The preliminary hearing happened 2 weeks later in a courthouse with metal detectors and security guards. Franz explained I didn't have to be in the courtroom with my parents, so I sat in a separate room watching everything on a video screen. The judge was a woman who looked tired and wore reading glasses on a chain. She reviewed all the evidence while my parents sat at a table with their lawyer, both of them dressed nice and sitting up straight like they were at a client meeting. The judge talked about the medical reports and the photographs and the educational neglect, using official language that made everything sound even worse. Then she ordered that my parents could only see me with supervision, and had to complete parenting classes and psychological evaluations and other services before anything could change. She said I was staying in foster care for now and my case would be reviewed in 6 months. When I heard those words, I felt my shoulders drop about 2 inches, like I'd been holding them up by my ears without realizing it. Franz squeezed my hand and said this was good news. The modeling agency sent a letter to Franz a few days later that he read out loud to me in Arya's kitchen. They claimed my parents' methods were just industry standard rigor, and that all successful child models required dedicated management and strict scheduling. They requested access to me for contract discussions and mentioned several upcoming opportunities I was contractually obligated to fulfill. Franz read it in a flat voice that made every word sound more ridiculous. But hearing them try to make everything sound professional and normal made me doubt my own memories of what happened. Maybe the ice baths were just part of the job. Maybe sleeping in the garage was necessary for early call times. Maybe I was the problem for not being tough enough. Franz must have seen something in my face because he stopped reading and said agencies don't get to abuse kids and call it business. He filed the letter away and said he'd handle it. School picture day came the following week, and I didn't know it was happening until the photographer set up in the gym. Kids lined up by class, and the photographer positioned each one on a stool against a blue backdrop, adjusting shoulders and tilting chins. When my turn came, I walked up to the stool, and he smiled and said to sit up straight and give him a big smile. Suddenly, I was back in every shoot where I had to hold uncomfortable positions until my muscles screamed, where my mother would pinch my side if my smile wasn't bright enough, where I wasn't allowed to move or blink or breathe wrong. My chest got tight and I couldn't pull in enough air. The photographer kept talking, but his voice sounded far away and tinny. I backed away from the stool and my vision started closing in from the edges. Someone grabbed my arm and walked me out of the gym. The school counselor let me sit in her office until I could breathe normally again, and she said I could opt out of pictures this year. Nobody made me feel bad about it or asked me to explain. I sat in her office for the rest of the period counting the books on her shelf and feeling my heartbeat slow back down to normal. The counselor let me stay until the bell rang, and then walked me back to class where everyone was already working on math problems I couldn't read. My next therapy appointment with Celeste happened 2 days later, and she noticed me picking at the skin around my thumbnails until they bled. She asked if I wanted to learn something that might help when the scary feelings got too big, and I nodded because anything was better than feeling like my brain was trying to kill me. She taught me to name 5 things I could see right then in her office. So I said the clock and the tissue box and the plant in the corner and her shoes and the carpet. Then 4 things I could touch, and I pressed my hands against the couch fabric and the wall and my own knees and the wooden armrest. The feelings didn't disappear, but they got smaller, like turning down the volume on something that was too loud. That night at Arya's house, I woke up from a dream about the ice bath and my whole body was shaking and I couldn't remember where I was. I made myself do the 5 things, 4 things exercise, and named the nightlight and the dresser and the window and the door and the ceiling, then touched the blanket and the pillow and the mattress and my own hair. After a few minutes, I could breathe normally again, and I realized this was the first time I'd ever made the panic stop by myself, instead of just surviving it until it went away on its own. The next morning, Nicole called and asked me to come to her office because she needed to show me something important. Franz drove me there, and Nicole had papers spread all over her desk with numbers and dates and my name on them. She explained that my parents had opened bank accounts using my information and deposited over $200,000 from my modeling work over the years. I stared at the numbers because that seemed like enough money to never worry about anything. But then Nicole showed me the current balance, and it was only $18,000 left. She asked if I knew where the money went, and I said no, because my parents never told me about money except to say I needed to book more jobs. Nicole filed something called a motion to freeze the remaining funds and investigate the spending, and her face looked angry in a way that made me feel protected instead of scared. I sat there looking at all those deposits with dates next to them, realizing each one represented a shoot where I stood in uncomfortable positions, or wore clothes that hurt or smiled until my face ached, and my parents had taken all of it and spent it on things I'd never see. They didn't just hurt my body with the ice baths and the heels and the starvation, they also stole the future I'd earned by surviving all of that. 2 days later, Franz showed up at Arya's house looking upset and holding his phone. The modeling agency manager had sent him an email with the subject line that said resolution discussion, which sounded professional and reasonable. But when Franz read it out loud, the message was included a direct quote from my father saying, "We made you. We can unmake you," like the agency thought using my father's exact threat would somehow help their case. Franz immediately forwarded it to the police and the judge's office and explained it would be added to my case file as evidence of ongoing intimidation. I felt sick knowing those words were now part of my permanent record, that anyone who ever looked at my file would see that quote and know my father thought of me as something he created and owned instead of a person. The agency was trying to sound reasonable while literally threatening me in writing, and somehow that felt worse than my parents doing it directly, because at least with them, I always knew they were dangerous. After that, Franz sat down with me at Arya's kitchen table and said we needed to make a safety plan together. He brought a printed list and we went through it point by point, starting with getting a lock installed on my bedroom door that only I had the key for. Then he wrote down phone numbers for him and Arya and Nicole and the CPS emergency line and the police, and we practiced what I would say if I called each one. He also created scripts for different situations, like if someone from the agency contacted me, or if my parents showed up somewhere they weren't supposed to be, or if anyone pressured me about anything. We practiced the scripts out loud, and at first they felt fake and awkward in my mouth, but Franz made me say them over and over until they sounded more natural. Having actual words I could use instead of just freezing or going into my marketable smile felt like someone had given me tools I didn't know existed. The next day at the school, a girl named Kendall who sat 2 rows behind me came up during lunch and asked if I wanted to join the library club that met after school on Thursdays. I automatically said no, without thinking, because I didn't deserve friends or free time. Those were things normal kids got, and I wasn't normal. Kendall looked disappointed but said okay, and walked away, and I sat there eating my sandwich and feeling relieved that I'd avoided the situation. But then later that afternoon, I realized I still remembered what she said, that the information had stayed in my head instead of disappearing immediately the way most things did. Library club on Thursdays after school, and some part of me had saved that detail, which meant some part of me wanted to go, even though the rest of me knew I shouldn't. Franz came for his regular weekly visit, and we sat in Arya's living room going over my progress and upcoming appointments. He mentioned that if my parents completed all their required services successfully, like the parenting classes and psychological evaluations and financial counseling, the judge might eventually allow unsupervised visits or even reunification. He said it quickly like it was just information I needed to know, but I felt my whole chest get tight and my hands started shaking. That night, I had nightmares about going back to the garage, about my mother standing over me with her phone scrolling through call sheets, about my father's hand moving to his belt. I woke up at 2 a.m. convinced I could hear footsteps outside Arya's house, my mother's specific walk in the heels she wore to client meetings. I lay there frozen for almost an hour, listening to every sound, before I could finally remember where I actually was, and that the doors were locked, and Franz had a safety plan, and I wasn't going back tonight. My next therapy session with Celeste felt harder than usual because I was tired from not sleeping. She asked me to describe the difference between marketable me and human me, and I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. I realized I didn't actually know if there was anything left under the performance, if I'd ever been a real person, or if I was always just a product my parents created for clients. We spent the rest of the hour trying to make lists of things I might like or want that had nothing to do with booking jobs, and it was the hardest homework anyone had ever given me. I couldn't think of a single thing I wanted that wasn't related to making other people happy, or looking right, or being what someone needed me to be. Celeste said that was okay, and we'd keep working on it, but I left feeling empty and confused about who I even was, without cameras and clients and call sheets. Nicole scheduled several practice sessions to prepare me for court testimony, and the first one made me so nervous I threw up in her office bathroom before we even started. She taught me that it was okay to say I don't know instead of making up answers or saying what I thought people wanted to hear. We established a safe word I could use if I needed a break, and she promised the judge wouldn't be mad at me for telling the truth, even if it made my parents look bad. We practiced with her asking questions and me answering, and she corrected me every time I slipped into my agency voice or tried to protect my parents by softening what really happened. It felt wrong to say things plainly without making excuses or explanations, but Nicole kept reminding me that facts were just facts, and I didn't have to apologize for them. One afternoon, I came home from the school and found Arya throwing something in the trash with an angry expression. She saw me and tried to act normal, but I asked what it was, and she admitted a local reporter had left a business card stuck in the front door. The card asked for an exclusive interview about child exploitation in the modeling industry, and Arya had already called Franz to document the contact. I felt grateful that someone was protecting me from becoming a story instead of a person, that I didn't have to decide whether talking to reporters was something I should do to help other kids, or something that would just turn my trauma into entertainment. A week later, Franz brought new lab results to show me, and this time they were from a forensic dermatologist who specialized in hair and scalp injuries. The report confirmed that the damage patterns on my scalp were consistent with repeated forceful extension removal and chemical processing beyond what was safe for children. The doctor used words like traction alopecia and permanent follicle damage, explaining that some areas would never grow hair again no matter what treatments I tried. I ran my fingers over the bald spots that I usually kept hidden under my remaining hair, and instead of feeling ashamed like I always did, I felt angry. These weren't flaws or imperfections or things wrong with me. They were injuries that someone else had caused, and for the first time I understood the difference between those two things. Lyle started me on this reading program that used letters I could touch, plastic ones with different textures on each side. The vowels were smooth and the consonants were bumpy, and he color-coded everything so my brain could track patterns instead of just swimming letters. We worked 3 times a week in the special education room, just me and him, and a table full of tactile alphabet pieces. After 3 weeks of tracing and touching and saying sounds out loud, I wrote a capital E on paper without reversing it. My hand knew which way it curved. I stared at that letter for a full minute because it looked right. Actually right. Not backwards or upside down or wrong. I almost didn't show Arya because it was such a baby accomplishment. Just one letter that kindergartners could do. But that night at dinner, I slid the paper across the table and she looked at it and then at me and started clapping like I'd won a Nobel Prize. She hung it on the refrigerator with a magnet, and every time I walked past it, I felt this weird combination of proud and stupid, like maybe I wasn't completely broken after all. The supervised visit happened at the CPS office in a room with cameras and a worker sitting in the corner taking notes. My father came in carrying this small wrapped box, silver paper with a white ribbon, and said it was a good luck charm from my grandmother. He held it out to me with that smile he used for casting directors, the one that meant he was performing concern. The supervising worker intercepted it before I could touch it, unwrapping the paper slowly while my father's smile got tighter. Inside was a folded note on fancy stationery. The worker read it silently, then read it out loud for the recording. Family loyalty is forever. Blood protects blood. Remember what we taught you about gratitude. My father started arguing about his rights to give his daughter a gift, his voice getting louder with each sentence. The worker terminated the visit early, escorting him out while he shouted about lawyers and constitutional violations. I sat there feeling cold all over, that note echoing in my head like a threat I couldn't quite translate. In Arya's car afterward, I started shaking and couldn't stop. We weren't even out of the parking lot when I started screaming, just this sound coming out of me that didn't have words. I clawed at my arms, trying to hurt myself because I felt like a traitor for not taking my father's gift, for letting them intercept it, for being the reason everything fell apart. Arya pulled over into a random parking lot and turned off the engine. She didn't try to grab my hands or tell me to stop or say it would be okay. She just sat there while I screamed and cried and hit the dashboard and tried to hurt myself. Eventually, I ran out of energy, my throat raw and my hands throbbing. She reached over slowly and asked if she could hold me. I nodded because I couldn't talk anymore. She pulled me against her shoulder and I shook for probably 20 minutes while she just breathed steady and didn't try to fix anything. 3 days later, Franz called Arya's house phone and asked to put me on speaker. Nicole and Celeste were on the line too, which made my stomach hurt because conference calls meant bad news. The agency had sent a formal proposal through their lawyers, suggesting one final professional shoot to fulfill existing contracts and avoid legal complications. They presented it as a clean ending to my career, a chance to close out obligations professionally. I heard papers rustling on Nicole's end. Before anyone asked my opinion, all 3 of them started talking over each other, rejecting it. Nicole said absolutely not. Franz said they already sent a response denying the request. Celeste said my recovery came before any contract. They didn't ask what I wanted or if I thought I should do it. They just protected me without making it my decision. And I sat there staring at the phone, feeling strange and good at the same time. Like maybe adults were supposed to do this. Franz came by the next afternoon with his calendar and bad news. The adjudication hearing got delayed by 2 weeks because the court calendar was backed up with emergency cases. 2 more weeks of not knowing what happens next. 2 more weeks of limbo between my old life and whatever comes after. He spread the calendar on Arya's kitchen table and showed me the new dates circled in red marker. He didn't pretend it was fine or tell me the system worked great. He just said this was normal but frustrating, that courts moved slowly and kids had to wait even though waiting was hard. I appreciated that he didn't lie about it being better than it was. At the school the following Monday, a girl from my math class cornered me by the lockers during passing period. She had her phone out with a yogurt commercial paused on the screen, my face smiling with a spoon. She asked loud enough for everyone nearby to hear if I was that model girl whose parents starved her. I froze completely. All my trained responses disappeared and I couldn't access the scripts I'd learned for handling questions. My mouth wouldn't work. She kept asking questions, getting louder, asking if it was true about the ice baths in the garage. I turned and walked away while she yelled more questions at my back. I heard other kids whispering and pulling out phones. I made it to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall until the bell rang. 2 days later, Franz picked me up from the school for another appointment, this time court-ordered. A psychologist needed to assess trauma impact and treatment needs for the judge's records. The office had beige walls and uncomfortable chairs, and shelves full of toys that were supposed to make kids feel safe. The psychologist asked invasive questions about my parents and the modeling and what I remembered most. She made me do weird tasks like drawing my family and pointing to dolls to show where people touched me. After an hour of this, I snapped at her, told her I was tired of being assessed and evaluated and documented like some kind of experiment. She wrote something in her notes, and I immediately felt guilty for being difficult when everyone was just trying to help. Celeste spent our next therapy session teaching me to identify different body sensations. She had me close my eyes and focus on my stomach, then asked if what I felt was hunger or anxiety or something else. I realized I'd been confusing them for years, calling everything hunger and treating it all with ice cubes or nothing. We practiced naming sensations. Hunger felt hollow and gnawing. Anxiety felt tight and fluttery. Sadness felt heavy and stuck. My weight had stabilized at 42 pounds with the structured meal plan Arya followed. My body stopped feeling like an enemy I had to control every second, and started feeling more like something that belonged to me. Nicole called with news about a court order the judge had signed. My remaining earnings were frozen in a blocked trust account that my parents couldn't access anymore. The judge also authorized a full investigation into where the missing money went. Nicole explained this meant they couldn't profit from hurting me even if they never faced criminal charges. It wasn't justice exactly, but it was something. I asked how much was left and she said $38,000, which sounded like a lot until I remembered there should have been over $200,000. The missing money was just gone, spent on things that weren't me. That night, I looked at my hair in Arya's bathroom mirror. The roots were growing in dark brown, almost black, completely different from the bleached blonde that made up most of my hair. I'd been planning to bleach the roots like I always did, keep everything uniform and camera ready. Instead, I made a tiny choice to just leave it. Arya noticed the next morning and asked if I wanted to cut off the damaged blonde parts and let my natural color grow. I said yes before I could change my mind. She took me to a salon that afternoon where a stylist cut away the dead extensions and bleached sections. I watched in the mirror as all that fake blonde hair fell to the floor in clumps. What was left was shorter and darker and looked nothing like my comp card photos. It felt like shedding a costume I'd been sewn into, watching my old face disappear piece by piece. The stylist handed me a mirror to see the back, and I barely recognized myself without all that fake blonde. Arya paid, and we drove back to her house in silence, but it wasn't the scary kind of silence. That night, I couldn't stop touching my shorter hair, running my fingers over the soft dark brown that was actually mine. The adjudication hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, and Franz had explained I could write a statement if I wanted to. I'd been putting it off because writing still felt impossible. But the night before court, I sat at Arya's kitchen table with a pencil and paper. Lyle had taught me to sound out words using letters I knew, writing them the way they sounded even if the spelling was wrong. I started with I because that one was easy, just a straight line. Then I tried want, but it came out won't, and I had to start over. I want to stay safe looked wrong, but I kept going. I want to learn to read came next, the letters shaky and uneven. I don't want to go back, was the third sentence, and my hand cramped from gripping the pencil too hard. The last sentence took me 20 minutes because I kept forgetting how to make the letters. Please let me stay with Arya, looked like a little kid wrote it, which I guess was true. It was only 4 sentences and probably full of spelling mistakes, but it was mine and nobody told me what to say. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket for tomorrow. The courthouse was bigger than I expected, with metal detectors and security guards everywhere. Franz drove me there early so we could go to a private waiting room before my parents arrived. Nicole met us in the hallway and reviewed what would happen, using simple words and checking that I understood each step. Through a window in the door, I could see the courtroom filling up with people I didn't know, all of them carrying folders and looking official. Then my parents walked in with their lawyer and I stopped breathing for a second. The lawyer wore a suit that probably cost more than Arya's car, carrying a leather briefcase that looked heavy. My mother had on her client meeting outfit, the one she wore to impress casting directors, and my father stood next to her with his hands folded like he was posing for a family portrait. I watched them through the video monitor in my separate room, seeing how they positioned themselves at the defense table. My mother touched her hair and smiled sadly at someone across the room. My father leaned over to whisper something to the lawyer, his face arranged in an expression of confused concern. I recognized every single technique because they'd taught me all of them. The way my mother tilted her head to look vulnerable. The way my father's eyebrows drew together to show worry. The small gestures designed to make people sympathize and believe and forgive. They were performing for the judge the same way they'd taught me to perform for cameras, and watching it from outside felt like seeing a magic trick after someone explained how it worked. The medical expert was a doctor I'd never met before who specialized in child abuse cases. She pulled up photos on a big screen, images of my feet with the stress fractures highlighted in red circles. The x-rays showed white lines where the bones had cracked from standing in heels for too long, some of them old breaks that had healed crooked. She explained how stress fractures develop over time from repeated pressure, how children's bones aren't strong enough to handle adult shoes. Next came photos of my scalp with the bald patches circled, and she described traction alopecia from extension removal. The judge leaned forward to look at the screen while the doctor talked about permanent follicle damage and chemical burns from bleach. My stomach twisted watching my own body displayed like evidence in a crime scene, but part of me felt relieved. Someone with credentials and authority was saying out loud that this wasn't normal, that kids weren't supposed to have broken feet and bald spots. The doctor showed before and after photos from my portfolio, pointing out the weight loss over 2 years. She used terms like severe malnutrition and failure to thrive, medical words that made it sound serious instead of like a lifestyle choice. My parents' lawyer tried to argue that modeling required discipline, but the doctor cut him off. She said there was a difference between discipline and starvation, between training and injury, and the evidence showed I'd been systematically harmed. Then it was my turn, and my hands started shaking before Nicole even came to get me. The closed-circuit TV setup meant I stayed in my small room with just Nicole and a woman who would type everything I said. A camera pointed at me, and a monitor showed the judge in her courtroom, and I could see her, but my parents couldn't see me. The judge introduced herself and asked if I understood I was under oath, which meant I had to tell the truth. I said yes, and my voice came out squeaky. Her first question was about where I slept, and I said the garage on 2 yoga mats. The second question was about school, and I said I never went, that my parents said it would interfere with bookings. My voice shook on the third answer about the ice baths, describing how my mother made me sit in freezing water to make my skin paler. But after that third answer, something shifted and my voice steadied. I wasn't performing or protecting anyone, just saying what actually happened. The judge asked about food, and I explained the ice cube diet, the laxatives, the weigh-ins before every shoot. She asked about the bruises, and I told her about my father's belt and my mother's nails. I didn't cry or use my comp card smile or try to make it sound better than it was. When the judge asked if I felt safe with my parents, I said no, without hesitating, and Nicole squeezed my shoulder. The judge took a long time looking at papers before she started talking. She said based on clear and convincing evidence, she was finding that my parents had neglected and exploited me. The legal words were hard to follow, but Franz had explained them before, so I knew what it meant when she said adjudicated. It meant the court officially agreed my parents had hurt me. She ordered continued foster placement with Arya, which meant I wasn't going back to the garage. Supervised visitation only, which meant my parents couldn't see me alone. Then she listed things my parents had to do before the court would even consider sending me back. Parenting classes every week for 6 months. Financial counseling to learn how to manage money. Psychological evaluations to figure out why they'd done this. The case plan went on, and I felt exhausted just listening to all the requirements. My mother started crying in the courtroom, but it was her performance cry with the delicate sniffles. My father sat stone-faced, staring straight ahead. The judge said she'd review their progress in 6 months and decide what happened next. But for now, I was staying where I was safe. When the gavel came down, I felt my whole body sag with relief and terror at the same time, because nothing was actually over. 3 days after the adjudication, Franz called with news about the modeling agency. They'd suspended my parents' representation and weren't accepting new bookings for any of their clients. The agency put out a statement about enhanced safety protocols and better oversight, all the corporate language designed to protect themselves from lawsuits. I read the statement on Arya's computer and felt weird about it. Part of me thought I should be happy they'd abandoned my parents, that everyone was finally admitting something wrong had happened. But mostly I just felt used and then discarded, like the agency had made money off me for years, and now they were running away to avoid responsibility. The statement never mentioned me by name, but everyone in the industry would know who they were talking about. My parents were being punished, but so was I, becoming the cautionary tale people whispered about at castings. Franz said the agency's actions didn't matter for my safety, that the court order was what protected me now. Still, it felt like everyone who'd been involved in my modeling career was trying to erase me, pretending they hadn't known or hadn't seen or hadn't been part of making it happen. Franz came over to Arya's house the next week with his calendar and a sheet of stickers. He spread everything out on the kitchen table and showed me what my parents had to complete over the next 6 months. 12 parenting classes on Wednesdays, 8 financial counseling sessions on Fridays, 2 psychological evaluations, 1 at the beginning and 1 at the end, weekly supervised visits if they completed the other requirements. He put star stickers on the dates when big reviews would happen, explaining that the judge would check their progress. The road stretched out for months with no guarantee of what waited at the end. Franz was honest about that part, saying completing the requirements didn't automatically mean I'd go back. The judge would look at whether they'd actually changed, not just whether they'd shown up to classes. I felt so tired thinking about 6 more months of court dates and reviews and uncertainty. My whole life had been scheduled by other people, and now the schedule just came from the court instead of from casting directors. But I still didn't get to choose what happened next. 2 weeks later, the school district held a meeting about my education plan. Lyle was there with 3 of my teachers, plus Arya, Franz, and Nicole sitting around a big conference table. They called it an IEP meeting, which stood for something about individualized education. Lyle explained the dyslexia diagnosis again, and showed everyone the testing results that proved I was actually smart, even though I couldn't read yet. The teachers talked about specialized instruction for an hour every day, using the same multisensory program Lyle had started with me. They'd modify my assignments so I could show what I learned without having to read at grade level. Someone suggested audiobooks and text-to-speech software for my computer. They made a whole schedule with different colored sections showing when I'd work with the reading specialist versus regular class. Nicole asked questions about progress monitoring and whether I'd be able to catch up eventually. Lyle said maybe, with intensive help, but it would take years, not months. Everyone around the table talked about me like I was a student with potential instead of a damaged product that couldn't perform basic tasks. They used words like capable, and intelligent, and promising, and I didn't know what to do with those words except store them away for later, when I needed to remember someone had said them. After the meeting, Arya drove me home and made hot chocolate even though it wasn't that cold outside. We sat at her kitchen table and she asked how I felt about everything. I gave my automatic answer about being fine, but she waited like she knew there was more. Finally, I said I was scared about getting attached to her house and her routine, and then having to leave if the judge sent me back. Arya put down her mug and said something I hadn't expected. She told me she'd talked to Franz about extended foster placement, that she was willing to keep me in her home for as long as the court approved it, and I wanted to stay. The idea of staying terrified me more than the idea of leaving. Everyone I'd ever trusted had hurt me, and trusting Arya felt like volunteering for more pain. But I'd already started thinking of the guest room as my room without meaning to. I'd started putting my things in specific places and memorizing which floorboards creaked, and knowing where the light switches were in the dark. Arya said I didn't have to decide anything right now, that we could just keep taking it one day at a time. I nodded and drank my hot chocolate and tried not to think about how much it would hurt if I let myself want to stay, and then lost it anyway. My next therapy session with Celeste felt harder than usual because of everything happening at once. She asked about my feelings about my parents, and I said I didn't have any, which a lie. Celeste didn't call me out directly, but she started talking about how people can hold 2 opposite feelings at the same time. I could love my parents and still need to be safe away from them. I could miss them and also be relieved they couldn't hurt me anymore. Both things could be true at once, she said, and that didn't make me a bad person or a traitor. Nobody had ever given me permission to have complicated feelings before. My parents had always demanded absolute loyalty and gratitude. The court system wanted me to be clearly traumatized and afraid. Everyone seemed to need me to pick a side and stick with it. But Celeste said feelings weren't logical or simple, that I could hate what my parents did and still wish they'd been different people who could have loved me safely. She said recovery meant learning to hold all those contradictions without trying to force them into a neat story. I left her office feeling more confused than when I'd arrived, but also lighter somehow, like I'd been given permission to be messy and uncertain instead of performing clarity I didn't feel. The next day, Arya took me to a shoe store that had rows and rows of kids' shoes in normal sizes. She asked what kind I wanted, and I didn't know how to answer, because I'd never picked shoes based on what I wanted before. The salesperson measured my feet and said I was a size 3.5, then brought out sneakers with cushioned soles and no heels at all. I put them on and walked around the store, and my feet didn't hurt. They just didn't hurt for the first time in years, and I had to sit down on the little bench because I felt dizzy from how normal it felt. Arya asked if they fit okay, and I nodded but couldn't talk because I was trying not to cry in the middle of the shoe store. She bought 2 pairs without asking the price, and I carried the bag to the car thinking about all the times my feet had hurt so bad I wanted to scream, but couldn't, because the photographer needed happy faces. We drove home and I wore the new shoes inside the house even though Arya said I didn't have to, and I walked back and forth across the kitchen just feeling what it was like to move without pain. A few days later, Nicole called and asked if I could come to her office because she had something to show me. Franz drove me there and Nicole had printed out a stack of emails that the modeling agency had to give her because of the court order. She spread them across her desk and showed me messages from my parents to the booking agents asking them to lie about my age for certain jobs. One email from my mother said I could pass for 8 if they styled me right and please don't mention the stress fractures to the athletic wear client. Another one from my father told them to cover my bald spots with extensions before sending photos, and the client doesn't need to know about any medical issues. Nicole let me read through them slowly, sounding out the words I could manage and asking her about the ones I couldn't. Each email made me feel sicker because I'd thought maybe the agency people didn't know how bad things were. But they knew, and they helped hide it because booking me made them money too. Nicole explained that not everyone was equally guilty, but they all chose to protect the business instead of protecting me. I asked if that made them bad people, and she said people are complicated, which wasn't the simple answer I wanted, but probably the true one. That afternoon, Nicole showed me different paperwork about the money investigation. She'd found $38,000 in an account my parents couldn't access anymore, and the judge said it could go into a block trust for me. But over $160,000 was just gone, spent on my parents' cars and clothes and the house they lived in while I slept in the garage. Nicole explained that some of the money was too old to recover, and some of it my parents had spent in ways that made it legally complicated to get back. I asked if we could get more of it, and she said probably not, and I felt angry and relieved at the same time. Angry because they'd stolen from me and wouldn't have to give it all back. Relieved because at least I'd have something, and that was better than nothing. Nicole said this was what partial justice looked like, and sometimes you have to accept that some things stay broken, even when you prove they were wrong. The next week, Franz took me to a supervised visit with my mother at the CPS office. A worker sat in the corner taking notes while my mother hugged me too tight and cried into my hair. She said she was sorry about everything, and she'd been under so much pressure from the agency and the clients, and I'd always been such a difficult child to manage. She talked for 20 minutes about how hard the modeling industry was, and how much she'd sacrificed, and how I never appreciated what she did to make me successful. I sat there listening to her turn the apology into reasons why everything was partly my fault, and I felt myself getting smaller in the chair. Then I remembered the script Franz had practiced with me, and I said the exact words we'd rehearsed. I need you to stop talking now. My mother's mouth fell open like I'd slapped her, and she started to argue, but the supervisor held up her hand. She told my mother the visit was about respecting my boundaries, and if she couldn't do that, we'd end early. My mother went quiet, and I felt something shift inside me, like maybe my words could actually make things happen instead of just bouncing off walls. That evening back at Arya's house, I sat at the kitchen table with a first-grade reading book that Lyle had given me. Arya was making dinner, and I looked at the page with the simple sentence and the picture of a cat. I sounded out each word slowly, using the techniques Lyle had taught me about breaking sounds apart. The cat sat on a red mat. I read it out loud without help, and the words made sense and connected to the picture. I started crying right there at the table because it was such a baby sentence, and I was 10 years old, and other kids had been reading chapter books for years. But also I'd done it, and the letters hadn't swum around, and my brain had turned the shapes into meaning. Arya came over and asked what was wrong, and I showed her the sentence and said I read it by myself. She sat down next to me and said she was proud of me, and I cried harder because maybe I wasn't permanently broken after all. As November moved toward December, Franz came over with his calendar to talk about the holidays. He asked which traditions felt safe and which ones reminded me of photo shoots. I told him I hated cameras and fake smiles and performing happiness for other people's pictures. We made a list of rules that said no photos without my permission, and no posting anything online, and no making me pose or say cheese or any of that stuff. Arya read the list and signed her name at the bottom, saying she agreed to follow every rule. Having control over how people documented me felt strange and powerful, like I'd taken back something that had always belonged to other people. Franz said this was part of me learning what my boundaries were and how to enforce them, and I taped the list to the refrigerator where everyone could see it. A few days later, Franz brought me a card that had arrived at his office. It was from Favor saying she'd transferred to a different unit that worked with teenagers instead of younger kids. She wrote that she was proud of how brave I'd been and she'd always remember my case. Reading it made me feel sad because Favor was the first person who'd believed me, and now she was leaving. Franz explained that CPS workers moved around between units a lot, and it didn't mean she'd forgotten about me. He said the system wasn't designed for kids to keep the same worker forever, even though that would be easier. I asked if he was going to transfer too, and he said not right now, and I tried not to think about what would happen when he eventually did. That week, I started keeping a journal that Arya had bought me, a notebook with blank pages and no lines. I wrote using the phonetic spelling Lyle had taught me and invented my own words for things I didn't know how to spell yet. My sentences looked weird and wrong, but they were mine, and they said what I actually thought instead of what someone told me to think. I wrote about the shoe store and the supervised visit and reading the cat sentence. I wrote about being scared and angry and confused all at the same time. Reading back my own thoughts felt like meeting someone I didn't know existed underneath all the performing and posing and client-friendly quotes. The words were messy and misspelled, but they were real, and they belonged to me. On a regular Tuesday at recess, a kid from the art class came up to me with a camera and asked if I could be in his school project about portraits. I said no without apologizing or explaining why. He asked again, and I said no again, and walked away toward the playground. I chose the swings instead and sat down on the black rubber seat and started pumping my legs. The swing went higher and higher, and my stomach dropped on the downswing, and the wind pushed my hair back from my face. Other kids played around me, and nobody cared that I'd said no to the camera or asked why I was being difficult. The future was completely uncertain, and I didn't know if my parents would finish their classes, or if I'd stay with Arya forever, or if I'd ever catch up to my grade level in reading. But right now, I was safer than I'd ever been, and my feet didn't hurt in my new shoes, and I could say no without the world ending. That was enough for right now. That's where we'll leave this story today. I know that was heavy, but I hope it reminded you that there are people out there who will fight for kids who need help. If this story touched you, a like really helps others find it. Take care of yourself, okay? See you next time.